Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kaufman. Wolf Tracks was a huge hit from the first segment that we did, and so we are lucky enough to have the guest that we had for the first episode back for the second segment, hopefully for a few more. Carter Niemeyer joining us from Idaho. And yeah, just to give you a heads up, Carter, a lot of great feedback. People love the breadth of topics that we spoke about last time with Doug Peacock's article about bears, the mountain lion situation that was happening. So we actually have some other podcasts that are going to be coming out of the segment that we did the first time. So really thanks for posting those articles and sharing them. So it's always great to have that wide-reaching effect. And so we have him back again. So we want to get your thoughts on just a couple things before we get into the articles that we're going to talk about today. So the first thing I think that's been on many people's minds for at least for the last couple of weeks, the federal status review of gray wolves finally came out for the Northern Rocky Mountains. They are not going to relist them under the ESA, give them protections, and they are supposedly moving forward with a national gray wolf plan coming in 2025. Just overall, what are your thoughts about the ruling? Surprised, shocked, not, and the actual thought of them putting together a national gray wolf plan going forward?
Well, since I've been involved in wolf recovery for decades now, I was not surprised at all that they would not relist wolves. Endangered Species Act, enabled us to do that wolf reintroduction successfully. We brought them here and the wolves did the rest. And so there is a good population, about 2,800 wolves in the Western population right now. So I just didn't expect them to relist wolves because under ESA, you kind of want to move on when you get a population going, and they are viable right now. What the states do to that viability remains to be seen. But I guess I offer up an option. I think maybe we should look at another way of protecting them federally. We've got the Bald Eagle Act and Wild Horse and Burros Act. And so there could be another avenue, to put them on a different level of protection when the states get, wild and crazy, like Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming are on that journey now to take the numbers down, whatever it takes, however relaxed the restrictions must be. So otherwise, I guess it's lawsuits. And I understand several conservation groups have given notice that that's the way they're going to come at it next. And Idaho and Montana wolves are pretty well, when they delisted them, it was on a rider bill, which included the statement, no judicial review. So it's going to be a challenge for lawyers even to change the status. And your second question was, I think I forgot already.
Just about the national wolf plan, or the idea of that. I mean, what are some hypothetical scenarios? Like, what could that really even look like? Do you expect it to be? Obviously, there's a lot of skepticism in the world of wolf supporters. So the question really is there a reality in which it turns out to be a good thing?
Well, I have become a huge skeptic after decades of working with wolf recovery. The wolf plan, national wolf plan, national wolf plan should have been done prior to the wolf reintroduction and wolf recovery efforts that have gone on, because now we have distinct population segments, the Great Lakes, we got the Western one, we got the Mexican wolves. And Fish and Wildlife Service had a history. If people really look for reading and tedium, go back and look how many times there's been lawsuits and challenges over delisting wolves. And so they've been delisted, relisted, delisted. I don't even know how many, countless lawsuits. And probably a lot of those lawsuits would not have happened had there been a national plan from the start. So bringing in a national wolf plan at this stage of the game, I don't know if I see any real benefits from it, simply because the states have pretty well laid out their blueprints, how they're going to manage wolves. And under most of the state legislatures in the states where wolves live, they're very anxious to kill wolves. We're already hammering them in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming. And if you look at the day-to-day legislative proceedings in the other states with wolves, there are many legislators doing their level best to get wolves downlisted, delisted, or in some status where people can start killing them.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure a national wolf plan at this stage is going to really bring us much change.
It doesn't seem that way. And I think that's why when people saw that, it was almost as if throwing a bone or throwing a, whatever it is, like, here you go, here's like a sixpence or a penance or whatever, a nickel, here it is. We'll give you something to alleviate the point that we didn't relist them. And that's what it sort of seemed like at the time.
Right. Or just to thwart further efforts, really.
Yeah, which we all know that's not going to happen. I mean, you already mentioned, Carter, that, Wild Earth Guardians already posted a press release. They're going to, I think there's prompting legal action, possibly from Wild Earth Guardians, and some other, obviously, places there. You've already posted to, I think, as of at least this recording. I don't know if the numbers will change, but I think there were, 276 wolves that have already been killed that we know of in Montana. And Idaho is looking to shrink the number, I believe, to 500 total. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one, Carter, but I think that was something that was also posted too.
Idaho's desire is to reduce their population by approximately 2/3. They estimate, I use the word guesstimate, that there's about 1,300 wolves in Idaho, and if they reduce them by 2/3, you're talking leaving 500 left. It's not going to be that easy to do, but certainly I think we've killed over 300 in Idaho already since mid-July, and there's a lot of time left this winter for wolves to be killed. And then we have a year-round season now. So on private land, it never stops.
Jeez. Yeah, it's a never-ending war. So, I mean, this is something that we're all going to see, I'm sure, in the coming months, in the coming year, obviously, with the federal status review already out there now, and then possibly all the legal actions that are come. I'm sure we'll be talking about stuff like that. The other thing that we wanted to get your thoughts on too, because you're part of it, but also this is really an incredible documentary that is 2/3 of the way released. And those of you, if you haven't watched it or seen it, please go ahead, because part 1 and part 2 are really great. Part 2 just got released, I believe, on Thursday. The Exposed, Trapped in the Past documentary, which features Johnny Marriott, Carter Niemeyer, a bunch of other wonderful individuals up in Canada who are really putting the information out there about the trapping and the fur industry that was happening up in Alberta specifically, and really showing that the fur and trapping industry doesn't really have a leg to stand on legitimately here now that we're in 2024. But you said you watched it again last night, Carter, at least part 2. Just for people who haven't watched it, give people your takeaways, at least from the first 2 parts, and what they can look forward to when they check this out.
Well, I got to give it an A+. John did a tremendous job of, first of all, locating these excellent, knowledgeable speakers that he brought in to talk about it. Now, I'm one of them, but I'm certainly not of the caliber of some of these people up in Canada. They really know their stuff, and that seems to be the focus of the programs, is talking about the trapping industry in Canada. but we have a similar industry in the lower 48 states. Well presented. He does not load the program up with a lot of violence or bad scenes where people want to turn away. I think sometimes people are reluctant to tune into these programs for fear they're going to see, some blood and gore and anguishing animals. There's a lot of that goes on, but not in these films. He's kept it mostly to narrative. The statistics in part two, I think, are excellent, just putting into perspective that the fur industry, as it began back in 1700s to the present, has pretty much been dismantled. There's not much left of the fur industry as we knew it, or I knew it back in the 1970s even. Fur values have dropped. There's a lot of animals going to the fur market that never get sold, so I don't know whether their pelts gradually sour and are destroyed or what. They do emphasize that this isn't an attack on the sovereign nations. Native Americans, they used to do all the trapping and hunting, and settlers come in and literally took away their opportunities, and we just kind of divvied up things and made our own laws and rules. So there's still trying to think of the proper term. Anyway, Native Americans still do some trapping, for their native culture, for clothing, for regalia, for their religious ceremonies and things. But I really cut down to the simple answer is I really wish people would tune in and watch it. It's really well done.
If you haven't, go to Exposed, their YouTube page, go to their website. You'll be able to stream it there. It really is good. And Carter's right. The numbers that came out in part two and detailing just the decline, like you say, of fur prices, of really looking at this and saying that this is not a sustainable living, I don't think, for most, if not all. And really, this is more of a hobby and more of something that you have to go out of your way, I think, to want to do to kill or trap this many animals to, maybe make a few $1,000s. And it's really nothing that can sustain anybody's living at this point in time as we're here in 2024. So yeah, definitely go check that out. And we're working with trying to get John back on the podcast to talk about it at length. So he's always out and about, but we'll get him to do a full deep dive. And actually, this is a great lead in, Carter, to something that you posted to, seeming that we're talking about traps, is this came out of Congressman Cohen, Nadler, and Huffman call for ending the use of body gripping animal traps. And so I know this is up your alley, and this was something we talked about in Wolf Tracks number 1. And so for this, the letter in part reads, and I'll just go through this, and then I want to we want your perspective, obviously. They're talking about the lawmakers commended Deb Haaland on the Bureau of Land Management's recent decision to end the use of inhumane M44 cyanide bombs to kill coyotes, foxes, and feral dogs on the land it manages. It says body gripping traps, quote, which include steel jaw leg hold traps, snares, and body crushing traps such as conibear traps, are inhumane and inherently non-selective. They indiscriminately injure and kill non-target animals, including endangered and threatened species and even pets. Continuing to allow these traps on public lands puts wildlife and millions of visitors and their pets at risk of severe injury from stepping into a trap. I'm sure you agree with that, Carter, but just go into, if people don't know what a conibear trap is, and talk about the force, because you were demonstrating a lot of that with Casey York from Trap Free Montana when we were at the Wolf Summit in Yellowstone. Go into what the force is for these traps and why this is such a positive step forward, that this is even being brought forward by these 3 congressmen.
Yeah, well, it's a proposal right now, a letter actually, and there's about 11 signatories on the letter. They're all Democrats. I went through the names to see if there was any bipartisan presentation here, but yeah, so body gripping traps, the ones I think of when I call them body gripping are the conibear trap, usually the number 330. They come in different sizes. Small ones are maybe 6 inches square. The bigger ones are maybe, I don't know, in between size. And then anyway, the ones that just scare me to death are the 330 conibear, which are about a foot square, and they're hinged. They're unbelievably powerful. So when you're just looking at them unset, they look like a square metal rods, and they pivot on rivets more or less. And so you have to compress these very powerful springs, and then you rotate the jaws. And again, when it's set, it looks square. They're really designed to set underwater on a runway, like where beaver dive out of their beaver house or come up to a feed bed, and submerge them. And when the beaver swims through them and they snap, again, it's instantaneous, and the force is indescribable unless you were in the audience and watched it snap shut. But it hits these animals with tremendous force. It just absolutely crushes the wind or the insides. And then on top of it, they sink and they drown. So underwater, it's kind of a double whammy. Unfortunately, against my principles, these things get set on dry land. And laws, again, change from state to state. So a lot of states do not permit them to be set on dry land, because if your pet, your dog, or anything else that sticks its head in one of these, or its body, if you fit through it, will be crushed unbelievably quickly. And I've shown people, using like a dog leash, and of course, if you have the setting tools in your backpack, I don't think anyone can work fast enough to get their pet out of them, because you're traumatized by the pure shock of seeing your animal caught. Most people lose their composure completely, panic, and within 3-4 minutes, your animal will be either asphyxiated or have irreparable crushed ribs, or who knows what other damage. They shouldn't be on dry land at all. And even the smaller versions that are set to catch pine marten and mink and smaller mammals, those have been known to be snapped on a small bear's foot. And bears can rip them loose because they're not anchored that solid for little animals, because you expect them to die. But if you get a bigger animal in them, they can snap, on the muzzle of a coyote, and the coyote could tear it loose and run away. Or grizzly bears have been seen running around with conibears stuck on their foot, and they're not going to come off. The only way they're going to come off is when the foot comes off. And so a lot of these animals, their foot is compressed and constricted in these body crushing traps. And eventually they become mummified, dry up, and fall off. And the whole time that this is going on, the animal has to, find a meal for weeks on end, which leads us into foothold traps, which you can also, I guess, consider them body gripping, but they catch an animal by the paw. But again, these traps are set by the size of the trap. It goes by numbers from an aught size, which would catch a Norway rat or a pocket gopher. And then they go up number 1s, 2s, 3s, up to start talking about a number 6 trap. You're talking wolf size traps. And again, as the numbers get bigger, the jaw span, or the jaw spread when the trap is set. Trap gets bigger and bigger to set for bigger and bigger animals. But smaller animals can set them off, and animals you don't intend to catch and set them off. And my biggest concern nowadays too is these wolf-sized traps, again, they're about like these body gripping traps. They're tremendously strong. They require trap setting devices to set them. And if an animal gets away with one on its foot, you got problems. So I've been involved in some lawsuits involving this and the concern for grizzly bears.
Yeah, and the issue of bycatch is certainly the biggest thing. I mean, to my understanding, it doesn't happen so much in other hunting scenarios for obvious reasons, because it would be very difficult to rifle hunt a species you don't mean to hunt. And of course, I'm sure there are exceptions to this, but it seems to be the only hunting tradition where this situation of killing something that you don't mean to kill is kind of a regular occurrence, or at least it seems that way. So for you, having the experience that you have, is this issue or is the frequency of this issue related to skill, understanding of the species, or, I mean, can it be corrected or mitigated by mandatory proper trainings and things like that? Or is this simply the nature of trapping and what comes with it?
Well, first of all, the word is indiscriminate. Traps, when you say trap or even a neck snare, they're indiscriminate. Whatever steps on them or through them are going to get caught. If you're a professional trapper, and I consider myself a professional trapper, I've been trapping since I was 9, and I've studied under some really professionals. And when I was trapping in radio collared wolves, I seldom caught non-targets. First of all, I set maybe 3 or 4 traps to catch a wolf to put a collar on. We didn't try to collar the whole pack. So if you're targeting an animal, I set very few traps. Usually could catch an animal or a wolf in this case in 2 to 3 days. And then I pulled the traps. But I've been harping my whole life that if you're going to be a trapper, and if trapping is regulated and if it's legal, it should be every 24 hours. If you can get to your traps every single morning at daylight and run your trap line, even if you caught a non-target animal, if you had a wolverine or a black bear or a grizzly or whatever, those animals are going to be in fairly good condition at that point. Most of these traps, the foothold traps, aren't going to break their foot, or they're not going to snap their leg, or a lot of these traps are offset, if there's a space in there when the trap goes shut, it grips the flesh and tissue, but it doesn't hit so hard as to break the phalange bones. But if you check your traps every 24 hours, I've caught almost 300 wolves, collared them, never killed a one in a foothold trap. But if you look at the regulations in the different states, most of the states will allow 48-hour, 72-hour, or longer for trappers to check the traps, and you are going to have problems. Certainly the animal you're intending to catch is going to suffer, but you're going to kill it eventually. But the other animals, especially in the winter when the temperatures are below freezing, their feet may not be frozen by morning if you check your traps every 24 hours. I'll guarantee you their feet will be frozen irreparably in 48 hours or 72 hours or longer. That foot is frozen hard. It cannot be saved. If someone's pet dog is caught in a foothold trap and lingered out there for more than 24 hours, generally, if you talk to most veterinarians, or if you've seen dogs hopping around on 3 legs, commonly they don't cut off the foot that's frozen. They take the leg off at the shoulder or the hip. So again, if you don't know what you're doing, and if there's a lot of people out there that don't, that's where the real wreck can happen.
I mean, is there education for trappers that specific to trapping? Is there the equivalent of hunter's ed for trappers?
Well, I believe there's more states that are requiring trapper education. And trapper education began when wolves got delisted here in the Western region. And you had to take an 8-hour class to get certified to become a wolf trapper. but they don't teach you how to trap in that 8-hour day. You can't teach anybody in a week. You can give someone the very bare essentials, and that's really what a lot of people have at maximum. You know, they go with a professional trapper, charges them $1,500 a day, and they ride with them for 3 or 4 days and learn how to trap like he does. But other trappers don't know anything and don't get any training, go to this 8-hour class, and in that class for wolf certification, you're taught ethics. And again, I will say you cannot teach an unethical person ethics. So if you bring somebody in and set them in a room for 8 hours, you're either ethical or you're not. And I know from some of the instructors who have talked to me, said a lot of these people show up, sat in there with their arms folded for 8 hours, and are real bored. And all they want to do is hurry up, let's get this crap over with so I can get my certificate so I can get out and kill me some wolves. So, yeah, essentially, I haven't seen states that have had very good instruction, but I hear tell that there's states that are going down that pathway, which is a great thing.
I mean, so we'll, if you guys, again, all the stuff that we talk about here, we'll have links to in the description, but you can go to huffman.house.gov. That's Jared Huffman's, U.S. Congressman's website probably that has this. Just to wrap it up, Carter, what do you think with this? Do you see this letter going anywhere, or is this going to be another long battle? Because I know the M44 cyanide bombs was a big to-do. Do you think this will field a little bit more opposition, or this will kind of die? What do you think where this is going to head?
I anticipate that it'll be resisted strongly because, again, this is an attack on trapping. M44s were pretty specifically used by a very small number of people, and there was a lot of they were restricted. Sodium cyanide was a restricted use chemical, had to be under lock and key and rationed and accountable. So I was not surprised. I was delighted that M44s were banned. But the traps, I think, are going to get a lot more pushback and resistance because now you're attacking the core of predator control. Foothold traps are used in nearly all states to control different species or reduce populations, like muskrat and that. But this is all directed towards large carnivores. But I think on our public lands, there's a good chance if the environmental community, the conservation community, whatever you want to call it, if advocates get behind this and support these congressmen, I don't think I've ever seen where this many individuals, I believe there's 11 on the letter total, have signed a letter indicating their desire to do this. So if think people want to make it happen, they better jump on it and join up with these more organized advocacy groups and conservation groups and get on the bandwagon and, you write letters and make calls and do whatever you can do to show your support for it. Anything can happen these days, but it takes backing and people getting behind it.
Yeah. Well, I think we have the Utah article next, and I'm curious what you think about this one. The quote is that it should take about 3 to 7 years for wolves to exhaust their food supply and start moving into Utah. It strikes me as unfamiliar, like I've never heard of that happening. Is that happening anywhere that should be a genuine concern, that wolves will exhaust their food supply and in mass just migrate altogether to Utah?
No, that statement, I got to say that statement is utter foolishness. Fear mongering, the sky is falling, Chicken Little. And, I suggest people get on the internet if you get a chance and focus on an individual named Don Pay. Peay. He's central to all this nonsense going on in Utah. And if you go back years, he's a wizard. He's been able to get 2 years back around 2013, 2014, for 2 years in a row. Don Pay was able to get $300,000 out of the Utah state legislature to keep wolves out of Utah. Now, I'd love to know how any human being on this earth can keep wolves out of Utah.
Right. How does one do that?
Well, you can't, you won't. And the foolishness of handing someone this kind of money, $600,000, 2 consecutive years, with no accountability. I don't think the Utah legislature required a sum sheet at the end, expenses versus benefits. And now we're doing it again. Don Pay is asking for, through like Hunter Nation and some of these hunting groups, for $500,000, I believe, this year to keep wolves out of Utah.
Yeah.
Nobody can do that. It's impossible. And to me, I just shake my head at this nonsense of tax dollars being, handed out to people stating this nonsense, because you're going to get nothing for your money. There is no benefit. Wolves are protected in almost all of Utah right now, except for a small corner. A few wolves have come into the state, and if they've gotten in trouble with livestock, Wildlife Services, the USDA branch of predator control, have went in and caught or aerial gunned these animals and killed them. But as far as private individuals like Don Pay, there's nothing they're going to do to keep wolves out. And Colorado wolves are not going to eat themselves out of house and home. And I'm going to repeat myself from the podcast we did a couple of weeks ago. Idaho, Montana, Wyoming have more elk today, 30 years later, than there were in these states when we did the wolf reintroduction. Elk numbers have increased. Deer numbers are up. Moose are still here. No wild ungulate populations have been destroyed by wolves. It's just a fool's errand to be, perpetuating this nonsense. And no, I just shake my head and can't believe that, knowledgeable, experienced, elected lawmakers can even go down these paths.
Yeah, and that's the worst part of it. 'Cause, it strikes me as odd that it's even being said, really, because there's no way that educated, elected folks, accomplished people, are ignorant to the fact that there is simply no evidence to support these claims. This is the really unfortunate thing about the age of the internet, where all information is accessible, but we still just get hung up on the information that I guess serves our identity best. But someone has convinced a lot of people, and I'm sure mostly good-hearted people, that this stuff is actually happening somewhere, that there's evidence of massive migrations of wolves just exhausting food supplies, and they're just going from state to state, just decimating elk and deer numbers. And of course, they're affecting elk and deer numbers and elk and deer behaviors more than anything. But this idea of decimation, I don't know if that's happening anywhere. I'm not the type to blindly follow. If there was evidence for this, after talking to countless biologists, a good number of which are also hunters, I'd be the first one to say, we're ignoring an objective reality here, but it's kind of nowhere to be found, I guess. If you look at like CPW's posts recently, they made some posts about just a beautiful photo of elk that somebody took. And soon after they posted it, the comments just started coming in, give it 10 years and there'll be no more elk in this state, no more deer in this state. But kind of, where is this happening? Of course there'll be challenges. No one's negating the challenges, but where are these kinds of things happening?
It's not, I can tell you it's not happening Uh, I've been involved in wolf recovery for 30 years, and after retirement, I read every day. I look at all of the latest publications, and wolves are not eliminating their food bases at all. Same way, if you start looking at all the nonsense you keep hearing coming out of the Great Lakes area too, you know, our deer numbers are dropping. I mean, you're talking 1 million deer in some of those states, yet there's not enough deer, and the wolves are eating them all. And you know, if a deer herd, which you know, deer herds do decline, it's invariably disease and mostly winter severity. Deer starve to death. Predators are not eliminating them or wiping them out. And even in years when the deer are starving to death, at least the wolves can put a fair number out of their misery or feed on the carcasses. The wolves are not doing this. But this, yeah, I hear you. It just drives me crazy when I read all these ridiculous comments where people talk the same way with the livestock industry. I don't know anybody in the livestock industry in my working career that's been driven out of business or lost their living occupation or whatever you want to call it to predators. They have management problems. They have family members who don't want to raise sheep any longer or whatever. They might have a tough time hiring herders, which now they're using a lot of Peruvian herders, you know, and other people that come into the country to do this kind of work. But no, wolves have this reputation of doing all this negative harm, and I've never seen it in my career.
Yeah. And we always talk about too about following the money, right? And it's just when you look at the article, when you go into the article, and again, we'll have this. This was from Colorado Newsline, so we'll have this also too. But when you look at the amount of money, I think since 2012, in Utah, they've dished out millions, $5.1 million in state funding during that time frame to this. To most of it going to the nonprofit Big Game Forever, which has received $5.1 million in state funds during that time frame, according to state records.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it sound like they are patrolling the border, literally, like making a line of people preventing wolves from coming into the state, which obviously...
And I think legally they can't kill them. And number two, there's unless there's a radio collar on a wolf and someone is sharing that information, there is no way that anyone in Big Game Forever or Hunter Nation is going to stop wolves from coming in the state. Now, you might see one running across the field in the state, but again, that's a Utah Fish and Wildlife Department issue, has nothing to do with them. So, yeah, if you're a Utah resident and you watch your tax dollars going out the door for this, I don't know. The politest word I use is nonsense, because these guys are doing nothing, absolutely nothing, other than, I will say that I know these individuals involved in these groups, like Big Game Forever, they do go back to Congress and lobby. And they do go back and feed congressmen a load of whatever you want to call it to get them to support this. But it's political. It's not science. Nobody doing anything. It's pure politics and taxpayer dollars going down a rat hole time and time again.
Yeah, and like you mentioned before, there are plenty of different reasons for the fluctuation in ungulate numbers. I mean, you know, there's hard winters, there's disease, there's collisions that really affect deer numbers and elk numbers, and do so fairly fast. But it's just unfortunate that I think that with all these things showing up sort of at the same time, just sort of extreme weather pattern changes and, you know, habitat issues and CWD amongst other diseases sort of popping up everywhere, that wolves are being introduced to new areas kind of at the same time that these other things are happening simultaneously. And unfortunately, they'll be an easy thing to blame, even if these other things have greater effect.
Well, the wolves have become the scapegoat for everything that's bad out there. And again, I'm one voice from the wilderness, 30 years of experience working with the wolves. And these wolves do get a bad rap. And there's just, I mean, we can talk about this all day, but proportionally too, if you look at the influence of large predators on, say, elk calves, it's black bear and mountain lions are far more significant. Wolves rate way down the scale. And then if you look at the proportion, like the state of Idaho, somewhere there's a guesstimate of we've got 20,000 black bears, 3,000 mountain lions, and 1,300 wolves. So if the bear and lion are already proportionally doing more, having more impact on young elk, and wolves are way at the bottom, well, there's very few wolves compared to these other large predators. But the states only, they use the word harvest. I say the states only allow a hunter to kill a bear or a mountain lion in most cases. But in Idaho, one person can kill 500 wolves here if you want to. There's no quota. In Montana, you can kill 20 wolves per person. In Wyoming, you don't even need a license in 87% of the state to kill wolves at all. So, yeah, I mean, the wolf, I mean, the legislatures, I blame them more than anybody. They're just dumping on the wolf because there's this negative attitude they've had since they were eliminated. And people are still proud. And my granddaddy killed the last wolf.
Yeah. No, and there's a lot of that.
They don't want them back.
No, they don't, and it's wild because like in the last one that we're going to talk about from Cowboy State Daily, it's the same thing. This is just Wyoming. The headline is "Rancher Not Surprised." Quote: Colorado wolves already near Wyoming state line. A lot of it is the same stuff that we kind of talked about last time, Carter. But again, this is. Wolves can travel 50 miles a day. Doesn't surprise me, which obviously, they're not going to stay put in the area with which they're dropped off in, as I think most people would understand. This is just, I think, a little bit more of, I guess, what you were talking about or what we've discussed many times is the wolf war at this point, and stating that, if they cross into that Wyoming state line, they can be shot on site. Like you said, no license. 85% of that state is in the predator zone. CPW in this thing, though, it does say, however, CPW is confident that its buffer zone, quote unquote, policy regarding wolf release sites will prevent any major setbacks. It looks like in this article, let's see, scientists found that wolves released in Yellowstone and central Idaho in the mid-1990s moved substantial distances in the months immediately after release. This is Livingston. Who is this? Who is this person? Average distance was approximately 50 miles, ranging from 22 to 140 miles from the release sites. So, take this as you will. I think it's more, like you said, just throwing, kindling on the fire at this point. But what is this? This is more just, kind of watch out wolves, don't come back to Wyoming kind of a deal. Is this kind of what you got from this? And then it really goes into Washington. I believe the tribes are going to help with the next round of releases. But anyway, your thoughts just about, I guess, the point of the article from Cowboy State Daily there.
Fear mongering.
Yeah.
I find it interesting anymore in the newspaper too that they used to interview wolf experts. I mean, people who have studied wolves for decades, people who have written publications, people who have had hands-on experience with wolves and experienced the day-to-day, the good, the bad, and the ugly with wolves. But now I notice people who are speaking up and being the wolf experts is somebody who I've never heard of before, who lives somewhere in a town I've never heard of before, who's never probably seen a wolf in their life before. And that's who the media is asking. And then people are quoted as saying, oh yeah, wolves do this, wolves do that. They go 50 miles. Wolves kill everything, get in the way, and yada, yada, yada. Again, fear mongering, 10 wolves in Colorado, no big deal. Nobody knows where they're going to go. In reference to the buffer zone, yes, we took the least moving relocated wolf and the furthest moving relocated wolves. You average it together, and they moved about 60 miles, either in Yellowstone area or central Idaho when the reintroduction occurred. So that was the plan CPW chose. Well, we're going to release them somewhere in Colorado where we're at least 60 miles or more from our borders to reduce the chances of wolves leaving the state,
right,
or crossing out these boundaries. And another fear, I mean, I see in that article reference to parasites. So we're probably going to hear about the Echinococcus tapeworm all over again, which was it was no issue whatsoever up here for the last 20 years, and it finally died out, the publicity. But wherever wolves show up in a new place, we go through the fear of everybody's going to get a tapeworm and get a brain tumor and die, which hasn't happened. And now the next fear mongering is, well, now they're going to go south. They're going to join up with the Mexican wolves, dilute that DNA gene pool, and destroy the Mexican gray wolf. Certainly there may be some mingling someday, but I think most of us in our lifetime aren't going to see it. But again, I call it fear mongering because we're always leaping for all the negativity that we can throw at this about all the things that are going to go wrong. And to me, putting wolves in Colorado is good. They've got 700,000 ungulates estimated to live in Colorado. Their elk herd exceeds the total elk numbers in Idaho, Montana, Wyoming combined. So what are they going to eat themselves out of house and home? Whether these deer and elk and moose herds fluctuate, as you guys use the word, they may fluctuate, but believe me, wolves are not going to be the cause of any fluctuations whatsoever.
No.
Yeah, I read all this stuff too, and I shake my head, and that's why I'm glad to, I guess, sometimes expound on your podcast here, just to speak of the foolishness that I read too. But this effort, this negativity is going to be, constantly projected on those willing to listen, and I guess may the best party win.
Yeah. And again, the you expressing more of this too, because I think just it's not about keeping this stuff in a vacuum, right? And we want it to be out to the masses so that everybody can see this stuff. And this is, by the way, this is even the first segment we had. This is literally a tip of the iceberg of the stuff that we just sort of like corner off, and we say, hey, let's just dive a little bit deeper into these things. And like you said, Carter, all the stuff you named before I'm in that part of the article. Concern that wolves could bring in new parasites, disease, tapeworm into Colorado's ecosystem. There's the risk the reintroduced gray wolves could pose the threat to the Mexican gray wolves. It goes on and on about it. So this is really more about, again, the status quo, as you would say, in the wolf part of this. And like you say, 10 wolves. I mean, it's 10
Let me interject. Colorado has chronic wasting disease.
Right.
Folks, if you want to panic about something, focus on chronic wasting disease. And remember, wolves eat sick wild prey, including those with chronic wasting disease. So look at the silver lining again. Here you got 10 wolves in the state, maybe killing some chronic wasting disease elk. So instead of worrying about a parasite, a tapeworm, let's focus on chronic wasting disease and see the benefits wolves offer, along with all the other large predators that kill sick prey.
Yeah. No, you're right.
And it should be mentioned that meanwhile, 4,000 to 5,000 deer are getting hit by cars every year in Colorado.
No. You need predators. Lots of predators helping. You don't need to be killing them. You should be encouraging predation to help keep those herds healthy.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was about 4,500 deer a year are killed by cars.
Oh my God, that's just one state.
Yeah, it's a lot of animals to just be wasted on the side of the road. Seems like another problem to maybe address. But yeah, man, the unfortunate thing is, when we get in these moods as people where everything's doom and gloom and we're pretty set in our ways, it's like the elk herd could double throughout the West, and it would just be really hard to drop this way of thinking regardless of the evidence. And yeah, that part's that's hard to grapple with.
Well, we've seemed to delegate these big game animals for humans. I mean, it's all about us. It's all about hanging antlers on the wall and feeding our families. And you've got 700,000 out there right now. And why isn't that enough? So whatever wolves eat is going to be infinitesimal in comparison.
Absolutely. And as we know, I'm fairly certain, and correct me if I'm wrong, Carter, I believe the success rate of a wolf pack, not just a singular wolf, I believe is under 8% or something like that per time they go out. So I think it's like, or 1 out of every 10 times they go to try and get an elk or a deer. So it's not, it's not even those they're succeeding every single time. And even if they did, I don't think it would matter.
Dr. David Mead has published information on that back in Minnesota, especially moose hunts. Yeah. They often, they're very happy when they do succeed. Like you say, it's out of every 10 hunts, they catch a moose. So, and that varies, of course, depending on the condition of the moose and all that too. But yeah, and I've watched, in my career, I've watched wolves walking around in fields with cattle, paying no attention. So people are always worried about, wolves in my livestock. Well, if there's livestock on the landscape, there's going to be wolves going through them all the time. And yet the majority of wolf packs in any of these states are not involved in livestock predation. But we always paint it with a broad brush that, if there's a wolf out there, it's looking to kill something. Not true. And I read about these mass killings, wolves go out and they'll kill. Years ago, 19 elk they mowed down over on, I think at Jackson Hole or on the elk range. But those are sick elk. I mean, you could probably, a human could go out there and chase them around and they'd probably tip over and die because they're teetering on starvation to start with. But those 19 elk too, that's all you hear about is the wolves killed 19 in one night. They didn't kill 19 in one night, and most of those elk never had a tooth mark on them to start with, so they may have stressed to death.
Exhausted them. Yeah, there's no way that any healthy predators are hunting 19 healthy elk, bull elk in one sitting. I mean,
it's not possible.
These things can cruise over mountaintops.
Yeah. No, illogical. That's that word all the time.
Right.
Logical, yeah.
Well, my last question is about the map, the watershed map. Looking at it, it looks like they cruised a pretty good distance, but looking at it, do you notice anything? Is there anything meaningful that pops up to you about it and about kind of what they've been busy doing so far?
No, the map, I think I don't have it in front of me, but I've seen the map, the Colorado map you're referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've stayed, if you looked at the radius outside edges of that shaded area, they haven't gone all that far. I mean, it's well within that 60-mile zone that we talked about. And a couple have gone up, I believe, Moffat County now, which is heading toward the Wyoming border. But yeah, they're kind of staying close to where they were put and probably trying to figure out, they were all disoriented. Now I'm sure that I haven't heard anything about pair formations, if there's been any mated pairs identified, but yeah, they'll start out there and they'll probably stay basically in that shaded area this time of year. Wolves disperse a lot in the winter, late fall, winter, and then they disperse again in next fall. So I look, a lot of these wolves are probably finding these wintering game herds, and they're probably going to stick pretty close to the food supply for this year. But yeah, they'll radiate out and give them a few years, and they'll be all over the state of Colorado, wherever there's a good food supply.
Yeah, that's going to be awesome. I mean, and again, the next release, I believe, is I think the same time frame this year into next year. I think it's between December of 24 and March of 25. So everybody get ready for the next release. It'll be here before we know it. So that'll be really exciting. Carter, just again, thank you so much for diving into these articles. Again, just a handful of stuff and bringing your knowledge to it, and again, getting this out to the general public. I think it's the best way to do it, and you're the best person for it. So again, thanks for talking with Stephen and I and getting this stuff out there.
Well, my pleasure. And I just remind your listeners again, if you're upset, outraged, unhappy, discouraged, depressed, you got a telephone to make calls. You can write letters. You can contact your state lawmakers. You may say, well, they don't listen to me. Well, they can't hear you if you don't talk to them. Make their lives miserable. Make your presence known, but get involved. That's how change happens, is getting involved and speaking up and speaking out. And if you don't feel that you're capable of doing it as an individual, then join any of these advocacy groups and conservation groups who have skilled people, trained people, and people that can communicate in your behalf and support them.
Absolutely. I agree with that 100%. Till we do Wolf Tracks next time, Carter Niemeyer from Idaho. Happy travels. I know you're heading out of Idaho in the next few days. So once again, thank you, sir. And how's to you all out there, and we'll talk to you again next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.